Thank you. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. That said, of course, joined by a very learned panel and people with a lot of experience. And the best part is we have people both from OEMs, we have also people from products company, and we also have somebody who's a real practitioner. So it's a pretty blended view. I'm very excited to be speaking to them. See, when we think of AI, especially in terms of innovation, then AI, of course, is here and now. There is no doubt about it. And I was reading somewhere that in India there's about 1,000 startups which get launched on a daily basis. This was a very fascinating number. 1,000 startups on a daily basis. That's the scale at which our country is growing, of course, right? The world's strongest, fastest growing GDP and our vision of the government in reaching the high GDP, I think it's very important. That said, essentially anytime you're thinking of innovation, I want to kind of also bring in our experts here, and the first thought today is how does it really matter, right? Because we all use our Aadhaar cards, our PAN cards, our personal data very freely everywhere usually. But is it really causing an impact? Should it be worrying us? So we want to kind of retrospect upon what the reflections are, right? So, and if I may bring you in, right? So to understand what the impact is, essentially from a practitioner's standpoint, right? Then when we think of DPDP, what are the aspects in which organizations should be thinking about when they are adopting AI, right? How do we get it right the first time? And what are the experiences you have seen across the industries when it is being thought of later as a bolt-on? What are the challenges there? Any reflections there would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Anujh. So, good afternoon, folks. Thanks for turning up and having a discussion with us. Taking on the cue what Anujh was saying, we have, just to put you a perspective, I come from IDfy. We are in the risk and fraud space. We have about 8 products in the market, from background verifications to video KYC. We have API platforms, AI-based AI platforms. And in the last 1 year, since the Act came out, we have been building a first India's concerned governance platform, right? And our journey has always been, it's not about building a software, but how do we take our customers and India through this process of getting DPDP compliant? So we actually came out with a whole handbook and everything. We have been talking to the folks and how to do that. So we have been always saying, just don't go buy a software, put it out there and think you'll become compliant, right? You've got to think through the process of what you're going to do. So in that prospect, when we have conceived this platform and designed it, we have said an organization which is existing is going to be having thousands of applications, probably thousands of terabytes of data, and you will have to come from both how do you get DPDP compliant and start making each business unit and each business process DPDP compliant. So we said that the way each function, while you'll have the central governance body in the organization under the DPO, every business unit will have to raise a champion, right? Who's going to be there. And you want to bring whatever consent governance platform that you are bringing out should be viable and enough to go through that journey. And in that journey, we said that, look, every business which is existing, let's take their applications and find where do they exist. And what we basically used is, we used AI itself to build, and that's why we say, people are looking at DPDP first and saying what happens to the data in AI. And we said, okay, first, how AI can help in DPDP, right? And in that quest, we built an Inspect AI, which basically looks at the applications, looks at the policy as well, the EULA, that agreements that you have, looks into it and says, what all are you collecting? Because if you look at the Act or in the rules, it's how you're going to collect it, how you're going to store it, how you're going to process it, and then you go through the life cycle of that. And the consent doesn't stops from giving a grant of the consent. It goes all through the life cycle when the data changes or when I want to revoke it, when I want to erase it, and so on and so forth. So the idea was that you first identified the application, what do I need? And that itself, if you look at the way you will have to do it is, you have to take a business process and create a purpose taxonomy, because it clearly rule says that it must be explicit consent. It is not about giving just a tick mark. So we always show that this was the tick box we used to always do, all of us, and whatever was written behind the scene, now it makes it explicit. So in our KYC world, if you collect a document, then it is meant for proof of identity. Then it is meant for proof of address. If you're taking anything which is optional for my email, only for that notification and nothing else. So the whole process has been to identify, create a taxonomy, build a module that how does it goes further from that? Any change, then how does the impact assessment? And let's not forget the data principle in all of this. Because you have the data principle, you have the data fiduciary and all. How does data principle know what I gave, where I am, and how do I go about accessing what consents I gave, how do I revoke it, and how do I process it? So we made it very easy. In this world, we use the data process, access rights management, to be able to create another module. And then you go to the exercise of now, where all have I stored all my data, and where all is it gone? So no organization of a substantial size doesn't use a data processor, because we ourselves are a data processors, because we do background verifications, we provide video KYC. So as a data processor also you need to have and manage the whole thing. And the way I look at it is that the data fiduciary, the data processors will form the whole value chain around which the data has got to be there. And then you must have a way that erasure is not only happen at the, or revoke, or whatever the life cycle, not only at the data fiduciary end, but at the end of the data processes. And so it's building that consent life cycle that we have been going through and establishing that framework and coming out of the book with the workshops and using AI to do that. And then we can talk about, because we have built so many AI models ourselves, keeping our fun, that I can talk about that in the next subsequent talk.
Well, thank you, Ashish. So data fiduciaries, especially, of course, taking the large responsibility and now taking more accountability more than anything else, right? And then you also talked about your visibility and observability into what is that AI stack? Where is the data really lying, right? And you also then talked about the consent management bit of it, and then how do you kind of do continuous governance over it? So very interesting. We would love to pick your brains again soon. And Sunil, if I may bring you in. So we've heard about a lot of method to the madness on the ground. And if we were to actually zoom it out a little more and think from a policy standpoint of how it is really progressing, what would your thoughts be? How is Meta dealing with it, or how do you feel about it? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much. And once again, thanks to everybody for joining us for this session. So I'll give a very broad survey of the policy context in India and comment about it from a model developer perspective mainly. So not just from with my Meta hat on, but talking for other model developers as well. Overall, at least as far as the Parent Act is concerned, it's good news because unlike GDPR, which perhaps has a very rules-based approach to regulation, the Indian policymakers tried to solve the triple maximization problem. And the previous IT minister, junior IT minister, had made this clear in several public statements, that there are multiple imperatives. You need to protect the rights of the users. We also would like to protect the innovation ecosystem. And finally, we need to make sure that there is effective governance in the country. And therefore, India's approach or solution to this has been the third way. Rahul Mathan has a whole book on this, where we decided not to follow the Americans and not to follow the Europeans, but to come up with something rather unique. I think broadly they have been successful at this task, and perhaps it is AI specifically where this is the hardest to do. There are a variety of maximization problems where it is positive sum. You can have both outcomes served rather easily. With AI, maybe it is more of a negative sum or a zero sum issue. And we have three ways in which we could potentially train models. The first, Ashish has already covered, which is consent. Consent is one of the legal bases to put personal information into your training data set. The second is legitimate use. It's a rather constrained ground of processing. It does not seem, at least from the examples, to be the basis that would be preferred by either the executive or the board. It looks like there is a preference to go the consent way. And if both these grounds of processing are non-applicable, there is the whole exemption. So there is an exemption which says that publicly available personal information does not fall under the law. But that comes with a set of qualifiers. One is that the data should be made available by the data principal themselves or made available by an agent of the data principal or made available under some legal obligation. So this makes it a little more complicated, and we would be curious to see how model developers operationalize this exemption, because it's a key exemption, whether we're talking about online repositories of personal information or search engines or even AI models, whether proprietary or open. This is one of the important aspects, because as most of you already know, a standard LLM is a massive compression of the 100 exabytes of publicly available data that is on the internet, and some of that data contains personal information. So this is the question that many of us will be asking as we go through our compliance journeys. The rules have not further clarified on the exemption. We were expecting it not to do so. So let us see how this proceeds as we reach the next stages in our compliance journeys.
Thank you, Sunil. Certainly very interesting to see how the policy is coming through and the flexibility also the model provides, right? Like you pointed out that the exception was not really called out, which gives you flexibility to do what you need to do. But at the same point of time, that also calls for the right level of risk management, because it is something that has been left to the organization to determine. With that, actually, we have Deepak right here from Google, and Deepak, as an organization which is actually building these models and Gemini and Willow, all the announcements coming through. Would love to hear your thoughts around the fact that we have seen how the implementation is happening in the industry. What are the areas, like Ashish talked about, areas which are working well, not working well, and things, the solutions that are already available in the market and how organizations can benefit from it. And then, of course, Sunil has brought about the policy framework perspective. How do you think this is going to evolve, and how is it going to impact the AI innovation?
Thank you so much, Anujh, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for joining this session. My name is Deepak, and I lead the Google Cloud Security practice. I've been reading about DPDP since it was come out in 2023, and Google, being a company who is so much deeply into data engineering and data science and doing a lot, in that space, I think it's a very, very important for us to bring the fact that how we do AI governance and how we're going to help every citizen of India in a way of offering them a technology which can safeguard your private data, because DPDP is not about just the organizations, it's about all of us as well. I want to bring two facts to the way that I look at it. It's important, and I also want to bring what Google is doing in that space. So let me start with that, the way that we build our foundation model. If you look at it, data is a new vulnerable assets that we have. We all know from a security perspective, the codes are being vulnerable. The configuration that we make in the systems become vulnerable. We are already dealing with that problems. We have still not been able to solve that problems. The other problem that what we see is coming is the data now. Think about the data which is lying everywhere. The data, garbage in, garbage out, we all know, right? So if I can build an application which is based on a data as a backend platform, and the data itself is vulnerable with misinformation in it, it can create a lot of problems. And that's where it's very, very fundamentally very important that as a technology provider, we take data privacy and security of AI models at the utmost priority. And that's why Google came up with AI ML commitment as a first company to go out and talk about how we train our own foundation model. So I'm sure that you guys know on AI, you have a foundation model, which is a general purpose model, which are trained on large data sets available from multiple sources, including internet. And then obviously you pre-train those models, you create custom models and so on. So Google does a lot of foundation model development. As we all know, we got large language models. We call them frontier models as well. There is a AI ethicals and responsible framework that we built in Google to make sure that when we build these foundation model for customers and for organizations to use, they are built with security and privacy grounds up. So we follow privacy by design, secure by default principles, and our AI principles are pretty much, as I said, the very first company who came up with, how we go about doing our foundation model. The point here is that anything that we do from a data perspective, we need to make sure that the governance around the data and how we're going to manage the data has been well defined. The policies are well defined, and we do so when we build those foundation models. What we also offer is that when you use a technology like tool like what Ashish was talking about, you have to rely on an infrastructure. You have to rely on AI models, foundation models, and then obviously you bring in data principals, the other people who are sensitive data to your applications to process that, at the front end, or whether it's at the, you're storing it somewhere. You want to make sure that the data security and data privacy is all done throughout the life cycle, from grounds up, and when the data has been ingested in the system. What we also offer in that space to offer customers, we call it SAFE framework. It's called Secure AI framework. So these are products which are available. So as I said, we offer a technology which is grounds up with the data privacy in mind. We build a foundation model with a private, with the data privacy security embedded into it, built into it. And then we offer a framework for customers to build AI-powered applications with a SAFE framework, so that they can actually minimize the data exposure to their customers when they use our products and our technology. So I want all of us to understand, one is that all our data is important. It's our responsibility to make sure that the technology that what we are offering to you, it's safer. It is not giving you a biases. It is not giving you hallucinations. It is not giving you a prompt engineering type of attack. And that's the responsibility that what we carry. But when you bring in your data to a product or to application, make sure that you are cognizant about who you are giving the data to, how is the data being processed, and what is the technologies being used to make sure your data remain private. So we do a lot of great job, and a lot of great work in that space. Happy to interact more, how we go about solutioning and implementing it from Google.
Thank you, Deepak. Really love the analogy of having the right foundation models and with the right checks and balances. The SAFE framework that you really talked about, I think these are the things which we keep talking of fiduciary responsibility of the data processors. I think the OEMs also have a lot of fiduciary responsibility. And this is a great example of how Google possibly is kind of bringing this about. I've sworn not to talk about Microsoft today. We'll do that another day. But Sunil, if I may bring you in. So we heard about the AI angle of it, the ethics angle of it. We also heard about things that OEM will typically provide when it's thinking of AI innovation. But on the organizational side, what could be and should be the other parameters, policies, or aspects that one should worry about to be a responsible provider, a responsible consumer of AI, while business can continue to accelerate on their path? What are the things that we should think about from that aspect?
Yeah, so the distinction between sort of ethical frameworks and legal obligations, I think, is vast, and we should all be super clear. An ethical framework, for example, what Deepak just mentioned, obligations that Google imposed upon itself. So even in the absence of law, we are going to do this because we think it is an ethical thing to do. So that is the space I want to explore with you. I think these are great things to do voluntarily, but I think these are terrible things to have in a law. No law should mandate some of these ethical behaviors. So I'll give Meta examples. I have not promised not to talk about Meta. So I'm going to talk about Meta. Meta is an incredible open source company. We have 1,200 open source projects. There is a report on our website called State of Open Source that has the list of the 1,200 open source projects, classic open source, PyTorch, React Native, that kind of stuff. Separately, we have 650 open source or near open models, all on GitHub and on Hugging Face, and 350 data sets. So this is where I want to come to. So as a voluntary self-imposed obligation, companies that do produce open source, and by lines of code today, even though Microsoft was very skeptical of open source 20 years ago, by lines of code, globally, Microsoft leads. The biggest contribution to open source projects is from Microsoft today. You should provide some of these tools. So one example, very similar to what Deepak said, we have a project called Llama Guard. So there is the main set of models that we have under Llama 3.2 series. So you get models of different sizes. But in front of that model, there is an 8 billion model that is trained on two things. One, on our community standards, which deals with all the terrible speech that a model might produce. Second is this privacy protection. If something looks like a phone number, if something looks like a email address or a national ID, how can we make sure that it never shows up in the response from the model? So those kind of contributions, whether it's an open source project, whether it's an open model, whether it is just a data set of problematic stuff, if we put it out, then all boats in the industry will benefit, regardless of what your approach is, whether you're proprietary or open source. I was just talking that attention is all you need. Without that paper from Google, we wouldn't be here talking about Gen I at all. That would not have happened, right? So because Google shared so openly, Meta benefited and so many other people benefited. So just to make that point about what corporations can do.
Thank you, Sunil. Very interesting insight on how corporations need to understand the right approach in making sure that what is being provided, right? So in the parlance of cloud security, if I may reflect upon that, there was always this aspect of the shared responsibility model. I think when we are thinking through the AI innovation, we need to draw that shared responsibility model. And Sunil and Deepak very beautifully pointed out, there is so much out there which has already been done. We just got to reuse in making sure that innovation is at the pace, we are not reinventing the wheel and able to benefit from each other, right, and achieve a greater good. With that, Ashish, I want to kind of pick up your brains one more time. See, with all the innovation happening, and we have heard about the foundational models, we've heard about how industry is adopting, we've heard about angles on ethics, AI, and how do you make sure that community standards are met, for instance, in terms of more guardrails around some of these models. But if we were to translate that, especially from an Indian context, and your organization deals with a lot of that, how real do you think this is becoming? Are audits going to be a real thing going forward? Are the actual inventorization of data going to take more precedence? So what does a solution provider is playing in today's innovation world versus what do you think organizations really need to worry about, if you were to draw some picture around that?
So that's a good question, I think, but on the lighter note, we are using all three of their models and we are making them compete against each of the models and building our own models. So the models will be there. But yes, the fundamental model has to be at that level as well, which is the point. But coming back to what he's saying, if you really look at how an AI model comes, and what we are talking about is an ethics-based AI model. That means if a customer says that I do not want, which is what Sunil was alluding to, a consent-based, then I must not use that data in order to make sure that the AI model then is accordingly adjusted. Now, if you think about it, the AI ML ops layer is where you need to make sure you understand the training data sets that you have. If OEM has taken it, same thing goes with us, where we define what is our data sets, how we have versioned it, then the corresponding AI model that has been tested against that data set is versioned accordingly, and then you know the life cycle through which data went and which went. And then you use techniques. So if I may use some examples, we have built, I'll just take an example of 3 models in the interest of time, but let's say we build a liveness model, where I take a picture, when you come on today onboarding, you take a picture of it because I need to match with your ID card, and I need to see it's a card of a live person. Now the question is, it requires you to ensure there are no false positives and all of that and that. We actually took our photos and generated so much data to build it. Now when the customer data comes into the liveness to do that, we have trained the model not to actually, the idea of an ethics model is that I should not be using the model pinpoint that person. Because if you're doing that, then the erasure requires you that you take it out. Like in the face match, which is our second model which we built, which is 1:n, where I take a model where you are onboarded and a customer, and I need to match that because I need to do a dedupe check or for some reason. Now he says I closed your account with it. That means you should not be using that model to do the match. But what if it happens to be a fraudster? Now as a law, you're required to keep it because I can do it as a fraud check for you. So there is a number of nuances in this to take that case. Same thing if you take risk assessment. Now, the risk assessment does not necessarily mean that I have to use the specific age and all that. I can, what we call is, create the bins of data in the age group, income group and all that, and do risk assessment. So in that sense, the model has been trained on a data. While we have taken the data, we have put it in a form, and we could have added what our techniques call noise, adding it to it, plus, and made sure that the risk assessment, if I do, I cannot pinpoint that. And if we go now with the LLM models and all coming in where these techniques, I don't know if all of you have heard about RAG techniques, which is retrieval augmented, where I take the data and create embeddings on it, then you must use even that technique. So where you have a generic model, you further improve that model, but now when that particular user comes in, I will match that one and do the processing. But now if he decides to say that, hey, no more, I want you to use because I'm closing my account or that, you'll make sure that embedding is removed from that vector database so that the processing can continue. So you have taken the guardrails by while how you trained the model and techniques later on in the various business processes, but at the overarching level, you must have your AI ops model correctly established in order to drive this whole process, that every AI model is ethics based. And that, in my opinion, would be the life cycle. What you were saying is all the value chain that we need to realize that they have done that or you have done that or whichever, that we get it right among us.
Very interesting. Thank you, Ashish. And as simplified as it sounds, it also sounds very complicated at the same point of time, with the ownership and the data moving so fluidly everywhere today. And everybody's dependency on somebody else, right? Because there is the digital ecosystem and the supply chain is so complicated today that when you think of enforcing some of these, I'm sure that these are challenges which we can talk about for hours and hours, and maybe that's a conversation for another day. But conscious of time, I know we have about 10 more minutes. I want to leave the 5 minutes just for any open conversation and questions if they're around. But Sunil, if I can bring you one more time, and kind of with all of that we are talking about, if we were to actually reflect upon DPDP itself, like where the law is really, what is it going to really impact on the industry standpoint? How real do you think it is becoming? Anything that you would like to share around the act itself would be helpful.
Yeah, I'll just build on what Ashish said and sort of just underline some points which he already made rather eloquently. So there is no sort of great clarity around PETs, privacy enhancing technologies in the law, but broadly, by reading the law, I think, and reading the reasonable security measures aspects, I think many people will start to do what Ashish is saying. And that's a good thing, that there will be more stuff like that. The example that he gave is, of course, using synthetic data to train the model, or using data within the firm, or where the firm has licensed that data set. It's completely clear. I think that's a wonderful thing. I think what Meta does, and a variety of other providers do, Google and Microsoft, also have open models which can be deployed on-prem or on-device. Then the personal data is not traveling to you, so immediately you don't have to worry. It's again outside the scope of the bill because it's not even on your machine. So everybody in the room, please download and install Olama and enjoy the power of sovereign AI. You can ask all your secret questions to the model of your choice, a Microsoft model, or a Google model, or a Meta model, or even a Chinese model if you prefer, or a French model. I think IBM also has a model. So lots of very exciting on-prem stuff. The next point about using it to detect crime. I think we need to check one more time about legitimate use for enforcement of law. I think that is sufficient. We need to check whether that was a good thing. So overall, this vision of AI-enhanced compliance, which Ashish is painting, I like that. I think it's the way we should go to get consumer trust as soon as possible and as effectively as possible. And the law is in a very good place. And it has all these sort of pieces that we need to give us some regulatory uncertainty. We can still have more, but I think we have enough at this stage.
Thank you. I think that was a lovely summarization. Anything that you wanted to add, Deepak, or can I lead to the questions?
Yeah, I think just to quickly, I think it's important that we all know that the AI is the forefront for everything we do. It's the most enlightening thing we will see in our lifetime, as we can't escape from it, if you don't like it. The point is that we need to build the trust, and the trust, what Ashish said, right? There is a part that I need to do. There's a part that he needs to do it. There's a part that we all need to do to make sure that we build a chain of trust. Even the regulators needs to do. These compliances help us to build that trust of chain. And we all need to play a part to it because there are bad people out there. They are using this technology for their advantage as well. So we all in this room, me as OEMs, Anujh is another OEM, similarly customer, as a practitioners, as a security people, we all need to come together and do whatever possible that we can do it. I want to make sure that we understand how important this DPDP Act is for all of us, and just few basic things that we need to keep in mind. Data governance, knowing where your data is, securing it, using the right infrastructure, using the right model, ensuring that it's based on ethical, responsible AI, and that's a good way to start with. And obviously the regulators would help us, to make sure it happens.
Thank you so much.